It's almost unbelievable when you hear it now, but there was a point, not that long ago really, when a major missionary organization basically announced that its work in an entire country was, well, finished, done.
Yeah, you're talking about Wycliffe Bible translators, right, in Bolivia.
Exactly. About 3 decades after the late 1950s, they had managed to translate the New Testament, or at least, key parts of scripture, into pretty much every Bolivian language that had, say, a couple hundred speakers or more.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, they essentially said, okay, job done here, and pulled out.
And that moment, it really captures a very specific way of thinking about Christian mission that was, well, pretty dominant back then.
Mm.
Ralph Winter, who's, a really key figure in missiology, mostly because he kept challenging how people thought about mission. He gave us a useful way to look at this. He talked about these 3 distinct eras of Protestant mission.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack those eras. What was the main idea for each one?
Right, so the first era, Winter linked this with William Carey, the sort of pioneer missionary figure. The big focus there was establishing the church outside of what they called Christendom at the time.
So places completely new to Christianity.
Yeah, think like the South Pacific Islands or the coasts of Asia and Africa, places where there just wasn't any established Christian presence. The big shift was moving beyond just working in, already Christian areas.
Okay, so taking the first step, planting the flag, so to speak, in new territory. Then the second era.
Exactly. The second era, and Hudson Taylor is the sort of key figure here, that was all about geographic expansion. Pushing inland, going to the regions beyond those first coastal places. Right, reaching populations further away, people who hadn't been contacted by those initial efforts, just widening the map geographically.
That makes sense. And that brings us to the third era, which actually my own parents were involved in with Wycliffe down in Bolivia. So what defined that period?
Oh, interesting connection. Well, a third era, which Winter connected to William Cameron Townsend, he founded Wycliffe, of course, had this laser focus, reaching unreached peoples.
Right.
The goal was, okay, let's get the gospel, the Bible in their own language, and plant a church for every single distinct ethno-linguistic group that didn't have one yet.
Okay.
So that work in Bolivia, translating all those languages, was seen as like a huge win for this approach. They'd seemingly finished the task for that country according to that specific definition of mission. Identifying those distinct people groups was the key idea.
Which, yeah, like we saw with Wycliffe pulling out, it created this idea that mission could actually be finished, at least in specific places. Like it was a task with a checklist and a definite endpoint.
And that brings up a really crucial question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What happens after that initial work is done? Actually, Ralph Winter himself later started thinking about a fourth era. He called it the Kingdom Era. His thinking kind of evolved towards maybe a more holistic view of mission.
Yeah.
One that was still needed, still relevant, even where churches were already established. He was pushing for a shift beyond just, initial evangelism and church planting to engaging with the wider needs of a community.
Interesting. So moving beyond just getting a church started, but I understand that idea didn't exactly get a warm welcome.
No, it really didn't. There was quite a bit of pushback, actually. A lot of missiologists who were very invested in that third era thinking, they were pretty critical.
Why was that?
Well, they had different ideas about the nature of the kingdom of God, what the church's main job really was. And apparently they managed to persuade Winter to pull the idea before it was even published. It's quite a telling moment, really, in how these ideas develop.
So this whole history, these different eras, it really sets the stage for what we want to dig into today. We're not necessarily trying to, argue for Winter's fourth era theologically,
right,
but more look at what's actually happening now, empirically. How is mission today different from those older patterns, especially compared to the mindset around, say, the Edinburgh Missionary Conference back in 1910?
Exactly. Edinburgh 1910, it operated with this very clear split.
Yeah.
You had Christian lands and non-Christian lands, geographically defined. And mission was seen mostly as a one-way street, sending people from the Christian places to the non-Christian places, the main goal. Evangelize, plant churches where there weren't any. That was kind of the core assumption. One of their big resolutions was trying to evangelize the whole world in that generation based on that map.
And like you hinted, the whole world context was just completely different then.
Oh, massively different.
Yeah.
The last 100+ years have just fundamentally changed the landscape. I mean, for starters, those racial hierarchies, colonial attitudes, the whole civilizing mission idea that was pretty much accepted in 1910,
Yeah.
that's now widely seen as unjust, deeply problematic, even abhorrent. And that shift has huge implications for how mission is seen.
Absolutely. And, Christianity's own historical links to colonialism and power, that looks very different through today's lens, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And you see that reflected in popular culture, too.
Hmm.
Think about how missionaries get portrayed in books now.
Right.
Novels like Hawaii or At Play in the Fields of the Lord, the Poisonwood Bible.
Yeah.
They often paint a much more critical picture. The missionary isn't the automatic hero anymore. They might be shown as paternalistic, maybe culturally clueless, sometimes even causing harm.
Yeah, that's definitely shifted the public image, especially in the West.
It's a world away from the kind of idealized view many people used to have.
And it's not just about how others see it, right? The whole landscape of faith itself has changed so much.
Precisely.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Western Europe. Areas once considered, the heartlands of Christianity have seen huge declines in church attendance, even just identifying as Christian.
Hmm.
And even in places like the U.S., where Christianity is still very prominent, there's often a lot more skepticism, maybe even disrespect, towards that traditional overseas missionary enterprise than there used to be.
And maybe the biggest change of all, many of those places that were the mission fields,
Yeah.
they're now huge centers of Christian vitality, sending out their own missionaries.
That's such a crucial point. That 1910 idea of a mission field being a place totally absent of Christians,
Hmm.
geographically or ethnically, that just doesn't describe most of the world anymore.
Mm.
The places that are still largely unreached in that sense, think somewhere like Afghanistan, they're fundamentally different kinds of places than the mission fields of the past. The sort of protected space that colonialism sometimes offered, that's gone.
Different how in ways that affect mission work.
Well, for one thing, these remaining areas generally don't just hand out visas for full-time foreign religious workers whose main stated goal is converting people.
Right, no missionary visas.
Pretty much, yeah. It doesn't mean Christians aren't concerned about these places, but that classic model, the long-term resident missionary just focused on evangelism, it's just not really feasible in most of those contexts anymore.
So what are people doing instead? How are they trying to engage in mission in these more difficult places?
Well, some might be, let's say, less upfront about their primary religious aims. Maybe they work in education or healthcare.
Okay.
Others might take on a legitimate, valued professional role, like in development work or business, and see that as their platform for building relationships, for witness through their actions in life. But again, they aren't really operating like that traditional full-time evangelist.
Oh, absolutely. You see a big increase in career missionaries working where Christianity is already established. Often it's about partnership with local Christians.
This includes places that were never really mission fields in the old sense, like parts of Western Europe, but also those older fields where the church is now strong, maybe even thriving. It's much more about collaboration, mutual support.
And it's fascinating, too, the senders are changing. It's not just North America and Europe anymore.
Not at all. That's a huge shift. You've got major missionary movements coming out of South Korea, increasingly from China, from places like Costa Rica, Peru, Nigeria. It's become a truly global, multi-directional thing now. Reflects how Christianity itself has spread.
And all this seems to point to a bigger evolution in how we even understand mission. It's not just about sticking a pin in a new place on the map.
Exactly. The focus isn't solely on geographic expansion anymore. There's a deeper realization that mission is still needed even where churches exist.
Right.
Think about that Wycliffe example in Peru again. Okay, they translated the Bibles, helped plant some churches, and left. But did that mean every single Quechua community suddenly had a vibrant, self-sustaining Christian witness?
Probably not automatically.
Right. And that's why you saw Peruvian evangelicals themselves start organizations like Mission Amen to keep reaching their own people within Peru.
Yeah.
The insight is that mission isn't just about the first introduction. It's about the ongoing depth and impact of faith in a community.
So the need continues, not just where there are zero Christians, but maybe where the church is small or struggling or hasn't reached every part of the culture. And you mentioned partnership becoming key.
Partnership is absolutely central now. Even where you have lots of local Christians, they might face, huge socioeconomic challenges that limit what they can do.
Sure.
So when they team up with Christians from other places, maybe through long-term relationships or even short-term mission trips focused on serving together and learning from each other, it can really boost their ability to minister effectively. It enhances their credibility, their influence. It's estimated, actually, that most North American missionaries today are working in exactly these kinds of strategic partnerships with local indigenous Christian leaders and churches.
So it sounds like a lot of modern mission involves this flow of resources, people, money, expertise, maybe not always to places with no Christians, but often from wealthier Christian areas to places with large Christian populations that are facing poverty or other constraints.
That's a really key dynamic. You definitely see that flow.
Yeah.
U.S., Europe, Korea, maybe, supporting work in places like Uganda or Guatemala.
Uh-huh.
And short-term mission trips are a big part of this. They build connections, and they often facilitate that transfer of resources. A pretty significant chunk of U.S. overseas mission funding actually gets channeled through those short-term trips.
And it's not just about preaching, is it? I keep hearing this phrase, holistic ministry. What does that look like on the ground?
Yeah, holistic ministry, or sometimes integral mission, it's become really central in many parts of the world, especially, say, Africa, Latin America, even among big Pentecostal churches. It's basically using those global partnerships to tackle the whole range of human need: poverty, disease, education, injustice, alongside sharing the gospel. The two aren't seen as separate. It's about caring for the whole person.
So like a church might run a job skills program and have Bible studies.
Exactly. Or a health clinic, or microfinance loans, things that address real tangible needs while also pointing people towards faith.
It's almost like the realization is dawning that the places that used to send missionaries now need some missional attention themselves. I think of Leslie Newbegin coming back to the UK after years in India and seeing his own culture with, like, missionary eyes.
That's a classic and really powerful example, yeah. There's definitely a growing sense that these historically Christian societies now need a focused missional approach.
So the line is blurring.
Totally. That old sharp line between evangelism, what you do at home, and mission, what you do overseas, it's gotten really fuzzy. Trying to share faith in a deeply secularized post-Christian context in Europe or North America throws up many of the same cultural challenges as cross-cultural work abroad. It demands that same missional mindset, being really sensitive to the context, communicating in ways people can understand, and backing up words with actions, both word and deed.
And this seems to broaden who's actually doing the mission, too. It's not just the job of the professional missionary anymore.
Absolutely not. That's a huge shift. There's a much stronger emphasis now on the idea that just living faithfully as a Christian, discipleship itself is missional.
How so?
It's not just about a few specialists. It's about all believers living in ways that positively shape how the church is seen and experienced by the wider world. And with globalization, even people with regular jobs can get involved in global partnerships and mission efforts in ways that weren't possible before.
So the emphasis shifts a bit, maybe less on just the sheer quantity of sermons preached and more towards the quality, the authenticity, the credibility of Christian lives and communities.
Precisely. Credibility has become just paramount, especially given, the baggage of history, colonialism, power issues, and the often negative ways Christianity gets talked about in the media or academia. Right. So there's this huge emphasis on living out the faith, genuinely, lovingly, in ways that actually connect with people's real lives and needs. Does it look authentic? Does it ring true?
And that focus on authentic, credible witness seems especially critical facing the pressures of secularization, like in North America and Europe, where there's a tendency to push faith into the private corner.
Exactly. And you see a few typical responses to that pressure. One is just, okay, fine, faith becomes private. It doesn't really impact public life, which, usually leads to decline.
Yeah.
Another response is to double down on politics, the culture war approach, trying to legislate morality, which honestly often backfires and can damage the church's witness, reinforcing negative stereotypes. But the third response, and this seems much more aligned with this evolving missional idea, is this focus on public acts of love and service, working for shalom, that biblical idea of wholeness, peace, flourishing for everyone.
So things like actually tackling poverty, caring for the sick, supporting a vulnerable kids' AIDS orphans, for instance, fighting trafficking, caring for the environment. Tangible actions.
Exactly right. Think about, say, a nurse who uses her vacation to volunteer in Haiti after an earthquake. That act of service speaks volumes.
Yeah.
And it often gives her credibility to talk about her faith back home in her hospital or community, or contrast students going on a wild spring break versus a group sacrificially serving somewhere really poor. It makes an impact. Even someone like Rick Warren, working on big issues like AIDS and poverty in Rwanda, that kind of engagement can actually enhance his credibility when he speaks about faith back in the U.S. And interestingly, these kinds of service-oriented mission trips often get positive press, even in secular media.
It's about building bridges, showing you genuinely care, which then might open a door for talking about why you care. I remember reading about InterVarsity Christian Fellowship doing work on university campuses against sex trafficking. And part of the strategy was explicitly about building credibility, showing they were serious about justice, which could then lead to opportunities to share their faith with students who might otherwise just dismiss them.
That's a perfect example. By tackling something everyone agrees is horrific, they gain a kind of moral hearing. It opens doors for conversations that might otherwise be slammed shut.
So maybe instead of Winter's Kingdom era, which got that pushback, this idea of a missional era is emerging, capturing this focus on actively commending the gospel through how Christians live and serve.
That seems to be the argument many are making, yeah. Kingdom can sometimes sound a bit like, political power or trying to take over rightly or wrongly. That's a perception.
Right.
Whereas missional maybe keeps the focus clear on the core motivation, sharing the good news with people who don't know it, but doing so in a way that's attractive, authentic, non-coercive witness.
And the main actor in this mission isn't just the professional anymore. It's everybody. All believers living it out wherever they are.
Exactly. Pastors and missionaries are still vital, but they can't be everywhere. That's why you see things like the business as mission movement growing. Lay Christians intentionally using their businesses, their jobs, as platforms for positive Christian presence and witness in the marketplace. And it's not seeing social action as just like bait to get people to listen to a sermon. It's more integrated. Word and deed working together, reinforcing each other.
And this missional era seems to cover a really wide range of stuff.
Oh, it's incredibly diverse. You've got short-term missions, businesses mission, ministries helping kids at risk, churches working on racial reconciliation in their own communities, relief and development projects, environmental concerns, all kinds of youth work, big initiatives from megachurches, donor foundations, funding specific projects, global church partnerships, anti-trafficking work, efforts to engage creatively with art and culture. It's a huge umbrella.
Which must have some pretty big implications for the traditional missionary career path. It sounds maybe less straightforward than it used to be.
That's a really sharp observation. I mean, if you want to be a pastor in a local church, there's still a pretty clear path, right? Seminary, ordination, finding a church.
Yeah.
But for the traditional cross-cultural career missionary, the long-term picture is maybe a bit less defined, less stable now. Instead, you see more people using their professional skills, medicine, engineering, teaching English, business as their way to be a Christian presence globally. Sometimes in places where you couldn't go as just a missionary.
Right.
You even see folks from, say, the Philippines or Latin America working in service industries abroad and seeing that as their missional calling.
Interesting.
And those who do go the professional missionary route often end up working in partnership roles, maybe more temporary or transitional roles, because the local churches in many places are now mature and taking the lead. And yeah, shorter-term commitments are definitely more common.
But within all this change, there's a need for a specific kind of person, a particular skill set. You mentioned this idea of a broker.
Yes, absolutely. The role of the broker, the facilitator, the connector, that seems incredibly important now and likely a long-term need.
Why is that?
Well, in this world of global partnerships, sharing resources across cultures, trying to understand each other, you need people who can bridge those gaps. People skilled in networking, cross-cultural communication, maybe project management, strategic thinking. They help connect the dots and make collaboration actually work. Missionaries with those kinds of brokering skills are really valuable.
So, okay, the methods and the scope of mission have changed dramatically, but you're saying the core priorities haven't just disappeared.
Not at all. That fundamental desire to reach people who haven't heard the gospel and the importance of actually communicating that message clearly, that remains vital. And there are still absolutely essential strategic long-term roles for properly trained missiologists and professional missionaries, especially in facilitating all this global activity and equipping the church worldwide. The point isn't to ditch everything from the past. It's more about saying, look, let's not get stuck only in those older, maybe narrower third-era definitions. Let's recognize that tons of Christians today from all walks of life genuinely want to live out their faith in missional ways. How can we support them, guide them, and channel that energy effectively, especially towards reaching those who are still truly unreached?
So just to kind of wrap this up, we've tracked a really major evolution, haven't we? From Mission being seen mainly as crossing geographic lines to plant churches,
Yeah.
to a much more holistic engagement with all kinds of human needs, and from seeing the professional missionary as the main player,
Right.
to this idea that all believers are called to have a missional posture. And maybe from focusing primarily on the quantity of proclamation to a much deeper concern for the quality, the credibility, the sheer authenticity of Christian witness in the world today.
That sums it up really well. Mission, in this contemporary sense, isn't just about packing a suitcase and crossing an ocean anymore. It's more fundamentally about embodying and sharing your faith authentically, relevantly, wherever you are. Across the globe, sure, but also right in your own office, your own neighborhood, your own family.
Which really leaves you with something to chew on, doesn't it? How does this shifting picture of mission change how you think about your own faith, your own role? Whatever your job is, wherever you live, what does it actually mean to cultivate that missional way of thinking in your everyday life? And how could you personally contribute to a more authentic, credible Christian witness right where you are? That's definitely a question worth pondering after we finish up here today.